Hello and welcome to another edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallin. Well, it was quite a by-election result, and it came very late into the evening. A lot of people thought the Liberals would hold on to that riding. It's been theirs for 30 years, and it's in the heart of downtown Toronto. But that's not how it turned out, at least not in the middle of the night. I discovered that because after the hockey game, I turned the television off, assuming the Liberals had won. Woke up the next day, the result was different. You know who that happened to as well? It happened to Paul Wells. He has just written this short, intense essay on the Prime Minister governing in troubled times, Justin Trudeau on the ropes. And that's what happened. It really looked like they were going to win.
Sure did. Look, I screwed up. I sent out a column before the news was out, before the news was known. But when I started writing the column, the Liberal candidate in Toronto St. Paul's, Leslie Church, had about a 10-point lead.
Yeah.
And when I put the column to bed, it was down to a 6-point lead.
Yeah.
And when I was an intern at the Montreal Gazette, someone would have said, look, if they lose almost half their lead while you're writing, maybe you should hold off until the morning.
You should pay attention.
And I'm not going to lie to you, the thought occurred. But I was feeling sheepish because I had gone most of a week without writing anything on my newsletter.
Yeah.
I've been trying to figure out how to explain the election in France to readers who don't live and breathe
right anywhere near there, because it's even worse than our system or the American one.
Yeah, although I think the French system is the best because it packs all the drama in between the two rounds of voting. But anyway, so I pushed out the column, and then I woke up and was terribly amused to discover that the central assumption of my column turned out not to be true. It wasn't the Liberal who won; it was the Conservative.
And you actually wrote a very funny, response to it, and saying, this is a lesson that's kind of journalism 101, and we all can't forget it. None of us can forget it. So I thought that was really good. So anyway, let's get on with the topic at hand. What do you think it means?
So the thing about the Liberals under Justin Trudeau is that their basic selling proposition is that there's a correct way to think. Yeah. And that most Canadians think this way, and that they understand that on questions of the environment, on questions of economic development, on questions of Indigenous reconciliation, and on and on and on, that Canadians get what they're up to and they support it. Well, if there's a place in the country where Canadians actually do think the way the Liberals want them to on these ways, on these subjects, it is Toronto St. Paul's.
Yeah.
I was in the riding 2 weeks ago, meeting, people with senior executive experience in higher education, big money fundraising, people who have worked for Liberal cabinet ministers, and they weren't sure how the by-election was going to go, and and above all, what they were hearing from their neighbors was, we've got a chance to send a message to Justin Trudeau that he can't ignore. And more people who have been used to voting Liberal and who think the way the PMO wants Canadians to think still voted against the Liberal candidate anyway. It's a big moment for the.
Well, it is. It's also a free moment in the sense that everybody knows the government doesn't change or the world doesn't end if you slap somebody's wrist in a by-election. But that, I heard some of the commentary from people who were questioned by, reporters on the ground. They really wanted to send a message, and their vote might not change back. Like this, I think you're right. I think it's very significant.
Last night in Ottawa, so last night being Monday night, the night of the by-election, I was at a nice garden party on the diplomatic circuit. And as I left, I ran into a veteran, senior, retired public servant who has worked with, as they all have, with Conservative and Liberal governments, but who I'm pretty sure votes Liberal every chance they get. Mm-hmm. And this person said to me, I wish I lived in St. Paul's so that I could send Justin Trudeau a message too. And I mean, they looked like, the Order of Canada, but they sure sounded like a Pierre Poilievre campaign ad.
Yeah.
And obviously there's exceptions. Obviously there's people who are even more persuaded they want to vote Liberal now than they have been for years because they see Pierre Poilievre as a unique kind of threat to the way they understand the country. But boy, the people who are willing to forfeit their personal preference for a chance to
a greater,
for a chance to
yeah.
to rattle Justin Trudeau's complacency seems to be a very high priority for a lot of voters.
He said the morning after, and again, we keep having the same conversation about, does he hear what people are saying to him, friend or foe for that matter? And he said in that way that he always does, I hear your concerns. It just means we have more work to do. We have your back. I'm here focused on your success. There wasn't a contrite moment. He didn't even say, as he always does, I take responsibility, for what happened 200 years ago. It's just tone deaf.
Yeah. It's also safely ignored. It is striking to me how much this resembles his reaction to the SNC-Lavalin affair in 2019, which was, it came out that the Prime Minister's office had pressured the Attorney General in the exercise of her functions, and this landed on the front page of the Globe and Mail, and the Prime Minister's entourage said nothing of the sort ever happened. And the Prime Minister, in his early public remarks, essentially ignored this brewing controversy. I don't think it's because they're trying to ignore it. I think it's because they don't know what to do next and they need to buy some time. So they're going to send him out to say whatever, while they wait to get him back to Ottawa, wait to have a couple of days of meetings and I mean, whatever they do. Are they going to poll on possible alternatives? Are they going to, But I just think that by next week there will be some new element to the way they're responding to this.
Yeah.
And I think they're already working on it now, but they can't tell us, so they're just going to baffle gab us until they're ready.
Until they're ready to put it up. One of the lines in your book that struck me, and it's short, it's like 90 pages. This was a deal you did with your publisher, Ken White, and he said, just like long essay form, just get at it. But you put it this way: he has, meaning the Prime Minister, has trafficked all his life in the currency of attention. So as long as he's the center of attention, good or bad, that's the point.
Yeah. Well, it's not even the goal. It's the thing he can't turn off. There's an element of his life that is as basic to Justin Trudeau's existence as gravity is to you and me. We might wish we could fly. It's not possible. He might wish that people could ignore him. It's not going to happen. He was on the front page the day after he was born because he was the miracle Christmas baby and the first, because one of his brothers also had the same amazing birth date, but he was Pierre and Margaret Trudeau's Christmas miracle son, and on the front page of all the newspapers. And elementary school, and he introduced to Ronald Reagan when he was a schoolboy, and
traveled the world.
Exactly, very much so. And on the nightly news while he was a CEGEP student because of a debate he was in on national unity, and so on and so on. So he can't get people to not notice him. He can't get people to carry on as though he wasn't in the room. So he spent his whole life figuring out how to turn that attention to his advantage, how to turn it to mockery, how to promise people he'll get to them later so that they won't bug him now. I mean, these are all things that we didn't grow up having to worry about, but that he did, and that's why I say the currency of his public action is attention, because it's the one thing that he's going to get whether he wants it or not.
And the strangeness, as you say, of that origin story, I mean, it has to impact every decision, and I think some of the negative ones too. I mean, we are told that when he makes these bad decisions, whether it's I don't know, taking a trip and staying with rich friends, or not commenting on foreign interference when you know what's going, like I could go through the list, but that he needs to have that attention. It's not that he's trying to eschew it. He needs it. He knows nothing else.
Yeah, it's so as you point out, this book I wrote, which incidentally is already now out in audiobook, which is
I heard you say that you were going to do so. That's great.
Yeah, so it's paperback, ebook, audiobook. Get it wherever fine books are sold. It is only like under 100 pages. And it's really an essay more than a reported piece of work. I was trying to do a few things. One was to put them in historic context. What's been happening in the world in the last 10 years that was none of Justin Trudeau's fault or doing? And obviously, answers include the election of Donald Trump and Brexit, the rise of a belligerent China, COVID, and so, as any other prime minister would have been at the same time, if Stephen Harper had managed to hang on, he would have been reacting to these big global events, not just acting. And then the other thing is, how can I explain that Justin Trudeau is in some ways not like other people? Not in a pejorative way, but just that he's had an unusual existence.
Yeah, absolutely.
The center of attention.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how has that affected the choices that he makes and the way he behaves?
So that it comes to, and this is the question, like there's a couple of books out now. Stephen Mayer, will talk with him tomorrow, and then do the Polyev book a few days after that. But the question, and I've heard you two talk about it, is he a smart guy? Is he leadership material? Or is it ego and a front man? Like, how did you come to assess it in the end?
So one way is to ask people whose work brings them into contact with the prime minister, but who aren't necessarily lifelong liberal operatives. So diplomats, public servants, people in the business community, people who who are often in meetings with this prime minister, but whose life wouldn't be changed whether he succeeds or fails.
Right.
And what those people say is he's a lot of fun to meet. He's thoughtful and not overly full of himself, and that he can speculate about hypotheticals and all the cool stuff that makes somebody more interesting in a conversation. I think he is at least quite intelligent and in some ways unusually intelligent. But that's a little different from judgment, and it's a little bit from the confidence of knowing that you're going to hang whether you make a good decision or not. So you might as well make the decision. He tends to over consult within his little circle and be too deferential to the people who theoretically work for him. But on the basic question of is he a bright guy, I haven't seen a lot of evidence that he's not.
So I think you use this phrase: no inclination toward introspection, humility, or an urge to up his game.
Yeah. So this government was elected in 2015, probably until close to 2019. I was not particularly critical of this prime minister. And I've never written about him as though he's beyond redemption. I mean, people can change. But in about 2018, 2019, I started to say, well, if people can change, when are you planning to start? When are you planning to identify things that your government's been trying to do that haven't been working well and shut those things down? When are you going to show some humility and some ability to adjust? And not because that's something that I just find pleasant to watch a politician do, but because I think if you can't do that, then you wear out your welcome very quickly. Someone who believes they're always right and they're essentially daring you to recognize how right they are is well, they don't stay popular for long.
Let me hold up the cover of a magazine that you once worked for. This is April 2019.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
This is a story by Paul Wells. The Imposter. He built a brand based on youthful transparency and change. He delivered stasis and scandal. What exactly is Justin Trudeau's truth? You got an answer yet?
Only that I think it's still a pertinent question.
Yeah.
You've worked at large news organizations. You know that sort of marquee statement that you make, whether it's the top story in a newscast or whether it's the cover of a magazine, is collaborative, and there's a lot of discussion about it. The thing is not that we called Trudeau the imposter on the cover of a national magazine. The thing is that it was, in the first day that it was online, almost the best read thing I'd ever written, and that it kind of resonated with how Canadians were conceiving the guy. I mean, you can put anything on a cover of a magazine. You can put the most outrageous things, and if it doesn't feel correct to your audience, then you've wasted your effort. And this wasn't just that we said something really bold about some of the guy's problems with credibility. It was that was a very widely noted cover, and that a lot of people felt like they had been heard when we published that notion. And I don't think the Prime Minister has ever had anybody in his inner circle of advisors who's willing to say to him, look, the stuff is just not working. Like, your protestations of innocence are, and so he doubles down on a mistake instead of trying to figure out a different way to do things.
The other question, I guess, and we sometimes have the same issue with the finance minister, with Chrystia Freeland, but particularly with the Prime Minister. I mean, there was the famous throwaway line, like, I don't trouble myself with monetary policy. It is the most important thing that a leader does. You're trusted with the finances of the nation. These are not government dollars. They are tax dollars. They are people who have gone to work and given you part of their salary. So what you do with it is most important. And it's not clear that with all of the spending that has gone on, and the numbers are staggering, that any major result has been achieved, or perhaps you believe it has fundamentally changed the country for better or worse.
I mean, I'm just looking up the statement that he made because there's something interesting in it. But
the post by-election.
So
we've got a lot more work to do.
Yeah, exactly. I'll get back to the by-election statement. But so they would say, and it'd be accurate, that there were a lot fewer children in poverty in Canada after the national child benefit than before.
Yeah.
They would say that he said in an interview with the CBC last week that Canada has the best fiscal balance of any of the G7 countries. And I mean, you can tote up some successes.
There are numbers to the contrary, let's put it that way. Yeah.
But one of the reasons I picked the on the ropes metaphor is that the whole point of going into a boxing match, spending half the fight on the ropes and hoping that you wear out the opponent, is that you're essentially waiting for the opponent's weaknesses to shine. You're not trying to run the best offensive game that you can. And in the political context, he has spent a decade waiting for Canadians to admit that he was right all along, rather than taking some criticisms as valid and adjusting his approach, so if I had to boil down the frustration that was expressed in St. Paul's, and that I hear very often from people who often vote Liberal, is this guy doesn't listen.
Yeah.
And anyway.
That's kind of the biggest thing, because of course, the the child payment has been very important, but the level of indebtedness that's being left with those same children is also a problem on the other side of the chart.
I mean, and like to some extent, I don't want to pile on. A lot of Canadians have a lot of questions about the alternative in this election and in the looming election. It's getting to the point where there's some serious thinking to be done about the collapse of NDP support and why that's happened. But I found the specific sentence that I wanted to find in the in the release. He says, this is obviously not the result we wanted, but I want to be clear that we hear our concerns and frustrations. And then, so what? Like, what have you learned about the concerns and frustration? He goes, I and my entire team have much more hard work to do to deliver tangible, real progress that Canadians can see and feel. I think if you were to ask the next 10 people that you met on the street, I don't think their concern is that he's not working hard enough.
No.
I think their concern is that he's working just as hard as he can at something they didn't ask him to do.
Yeah. No, exactly.
It's so it's like if you order salad and the waiter keeps bringing you soup.
Yeah.
And you say, look, no, I wanted the salad. I didn't want the soup. And the waiter says, oh, the soup is cold. Let me hurry and get you the soup faster.
Yeah, and the soup's good. It's good for you.
And I know you've ordered salad, but you're not in decision mode yet, which is what he said about voters a week ago.
Exactly. So do you buy into, and I want to come to the shape of government in just a moment, but to all of this point that he's doing a lot of stuff that people don't want or too much of it, like we keep having this discussion. I think everybody cares and is concerned about the environment, but maybe not at the expense of everybody that works in the oil and gas sector or agriculture. Maybe there needs to be a little bit more compromise there. Do you buy into the sort of the Great Reset and they all went off to, meetings with Schreiber and came back and said, we're going to reinvent the world as we know it? He did say some very concerning things about, believing in a borderless world and, opening up the floodgates. Where do you come down on all of that?
Well, that's a big question. I think that in the first panic of a global viral infection that was killing a lot of people, a lot of people said, the world's going to have to work together to get past this and into a new thing. And some of the ways in which that was expressed came out sounding kind of worrisome, like we're going to have to rethink the world's economic systems and stuff like that.
Right.
But I think it was hubris more than wickedness. I think the notion that economic systems can be rethought has a long history of ending badly. And I think as soon as Justin Trudeau and progressive governments around the world, as soon as they realized that it was going over badly, they adjusted and changed their, another thing I try and do with this book is not try and paint Trudeau as a sort of mustache twirling cartoon villain. I don't I think he is the legitimate leader of one of the great Canadian political parties who's been doing his best and has some successes to show. I don't think that he's been plotting with Klaus Schwab to take down Canadian democracy, and but I do think that the talk of a new approach to a green economy in the middle of a global catastrophe was a strange reaction, and that
Yeah.
there was no way it was going to last very long.
Yeah. Well, I think that is the thing that comes down to the judgment issue and the qualifications for leadership, because that, that's a mistake. And there are several of them, which is, the timing of when you utter these pronouncements about how you'd like to see the world change. I mean, that is a judgment call, and that's what you're paid to do if you're the leader of a G7 country.
So, but I also don't get too upset when a political leader makes a mistake, even a big mistake. The question is, do they understand why it didn't work or why it wasn't accepted by enough of the electorate?
And what do you think the answer to that is?
Yeah, like, I actually think, like, I buy a lot of the reasoning behind carbon taxes, and I think that it's a way to send price signals in such a way that people adjust their behavior. And I mean, all the rationale for having a carbon tax. But if my objective is to reduce carbon emissions, and a carbon tax starts to become the thing that is making me increasingly politically toxic from one end of the country to the other, then I would at least start to game out other policy options besides a carbon tax, and they've had this Canada Infrastructure Bank for a decade, endowed it with $35 billion. It's not going very well. And everybody recognizes this, except the people who work at the Canada Infrastructure Bank and the ministers responsible for it.
Right.
And over time, that's corrosive to your credibility, because if you don't notice what everyone else notices, then they get to notice that.
Well, and there's a dozen of these scandals, quote unquote, a week. The Arrive can, the spending, the contracting out, the increasing number of civil servants, the inability to bring people back to work. Like, it just seems a little, no, more than a little, quite dysfunctional.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's also a bad time for incumbent governments in general across the Western world. I mean, it's striking that even as the Liberals are headed towards very difficult electoral outcome here in Canada, it's the Tories who are facing almost exactly the same situation in Britain. And it's not that Britain is less conservative than Canada, or
No, that's exactly right.
It's just that whoever's been in power for several years is voters don't have a lot of patience for incumbent governments right now.
Yeah.
Anyway.
No, of whatever stripe. You dedicate some time to this. If the federal government's machinery is in terrible shape, so is this government's ability to work with other levels of government. This is a very Trudeau problem. He doesn't have a background in deal making, which requires reconciling conflicting interests in pursuit of a large goal. Again, what you need to do, especially in this country with its diversity, and I mean geographic. I come from a part of the world that feels very not part of the center.
Yeah, I mean, so when Trudeau had been prime minister for a couple of years, I'm thinking near the end of 2018, Jean Chrétien came out with one of his books that was sort of memoirs, like funny anecdotes from his time in office, right?
Yeah.
It was not a very serious sort of thesis of government. But I was reading this new book from Chrétien, and I thought, it is just story after story of Chrétien making a decision, reading the room, seeing what's needed, seeing what he could concede to get some help from an unlikely ally so that they could move forward, maybe not to where either of them wanted to go, but to a place they could both live with, again and again and again. And I thought, that's what I've been missing. I've been missing that, horse trading.
And Brian Mulroney did it too, right? It was
and Stephen Harper, often in surprising ways, like with the motion recognizing Quebec as a nation within a united Canada and so on, right? And so what are you doing when you are negotiating and accommodating in politics? You're saying, I need something from you, other political leader, you know. What do you need that I could offer up that might not be the most pleasant thing for me to concede, or, so that we can build this other thing that is bigger and works in more interesting ways. Whereas what Trudeau prefers to do is to wait until you finally agree that he was right all along, or figure out some system where both you and he can spend an even larger amount of money, so that there's no loser in the thing, right? Yeah. So he and Doug Ford have gotten a certain distance down the field together
with
by just buying a succession of battery plants. But there's never a moment where, like on healthcare negotiations, there's never a moment where he says, well, we'll accept a little less oversight for a little bit more freedom, As a matter of fact, lately, Trudeau's habit on healthcare, which is like the consummate issue of federal provincial negotiations. The last time he had the premiers to Ottawa to discuss healthcare, all he did was he read the agreement to them and told them they could go home now. Like there was no discussion, And that's not something that I think is like particularly wicked or horrible, or that makes me angry or anything. But I just wonder, it makes me wonder who thinks that that's how government works.
Well, I mean, as somebody from the West, I look at this, for example, the kind of statements that were made about the oil and gas sector and the people who work in it. And then the answer is, well, I bought your damn pipeline, so isn't that enough? Right? Like but it was after the divisions had already been driven so wide, right? Yeah.
Now, mind you, if in the hypothetical case where Pierre Poilievre gets to be prime minister, I'm awfully curious to see how much success he'll have exporting Canadian resources to a world that really is very concerned about carbon output, and electorally how far he'll get if he thinks that he can simply ignore people with environmental concerns. I mean,
I don't think you can ignore them. Do you think he thinks that?
Well, we'll find out, because those people vote, they don't go away. Yeah. So, I mean, so the question is, how can Canada get its oil to Tidewater? Stephen Harper and Joe Oliver had a model that didn't work. Justin Trudeau and Rachel Notley had a model that didn't work very well. And I'm awful curious to see what Pierre Poilievre's model is, because you need to reconcile environmental and energy needs.
But you need those relationships that you just described to do that. There needs to be something in it for everybody. Otherwise, you don't reconcile.
Yeah. So one of the questions I have is, if we replace a Liberal government with a Conservative government, are we replacing a lousy negotiator with a great negotiator? Or are we replacing a lousy negotiator with a different kind of lousy negotiator?
Yeah.
And that's something that only the Canadian electorate and the people concerned can answer. I like.
Well, they only have two choices. Well, I guess theoretically three, but people, I mean, most, as you would agree, I'm sure elections are about getting rid of the guys that are there, not embracing with love and affection the new ones that are coming.
Yeah, to some extent, although I think the difference between the John Turner Liberals in 1988 and the Jean Chrétien Liberals in 1993 was that between Turner and Chrétien, the Liberals did more work to convince Canadians that they were ready. And similarly with the Stephen Harper Conservatives in 2004, the Stephen Harper Conservatives in 2006, the electorates, I find, actually only throw the bums out when they start to be pretty comfortable with the bums who might replace them. And Poilievre has done real work on that. I mean, people aren't just voting Poilievre or people aren't just considering voting Conservative because they really don't like the Liberals. They have given Poilievre
a
2 years worth of look. And at worst, more and more Canadians think he's worth the risk. And actually, my read of the situation is more and more Canadians actively like what they see in Poilievre. But I'm getting around. I mean, I've been around for a long time, and I've seen changes of government, and I don't feel a need to go through the charade of saying, well, this current government is just unacceptable. The next one will be fantastic.
Yeah.
Because I've seen the way it works out. So I started looking, I'm like the kid who doesn't want to wait till Christmas. I'm already opening the package and shaking it to see what's inside. So
and what do you make of the numbers? We know how, as the pollsters would call it, inefficient the Conservative vote is, because it's, he's going to get 100% of the vote in Alberta, or whatever the numbers may be. And in the context of this by-election, because on the one hand, as we said earlier, it's a free shot, right? But in the heart of downtown Toronto, it's important. It's really important if you're assessing what might happen to other unthinkable ridings, ridings that would never change.
So what I was going to say is I think this was an unusually bad result for the Liberals. Like that, I don't think you can expect that kind of swing all over the place. But again, why would you not expect a big swing? Because sure, it was a by-election, and sure, it was unusual for the parties. Like the Conservatives poured a lot of resources in, and but the voters were just some more voters. They're not weird voters. They're not and their reaction was interesting. Liberals told them to stop messing around and vote the correct way, and their response was to vote more strongly against the Liberals. The swing in Toronto St. Paul's was bigger than the general swing in the polls in the last 2 years. So I'm not sure why that. I'm not sure why that same situation wouldn't manifest itself.
Might not apply.
Why electorates elsewhere would respond any differently if they're simply told you have to smarten up and vote correctly.
Yeah.
You're not in decision mode yet. I mean,
No, whatever Chrystia Freeland's statement was, that, you're cold-hearted if you make another choice because our values are right and their values are wrong. Like, you can't really say that to voters. They get to choose.
And I mean, everything the Liberals have been expecting to happen, that people would be afraid of Pierre Poilievre, that they would get tired of Pierre Poilievre, thumping his chest and bragging about how clever he is. And all of that has actually had time to happen if it was going to happen, and it hasn't happened.
Yeah.
It's not as though Canada rushed into this by-election, or Canadian, I mean, I would be really concerned if I was in the circle around Justin Trudeau, and I would not be saying things like, we just have to work harder.
Yeah, whoever said that. But I think you're right. I think they're trying to figure out what the response is. And so they've bought some time. And so he made his statement. So everybody has their clip, and then he'll go off and get on another plane. But it does have to be answered in some larger way.
Yeah. Sorry I mean, I'm thinking out loud, which is why I'm pausing like this, but I mean, if I was in that Prime Minister's office, I would start to ask questions like, is there any circumstance in which Justin Trudeau visiting a riding increases the Liberal Party's chances in that riding?
Right.
and
sit down with a little pen and an electoral map and answer that question. Yeah.
And then I always wonder. I mean, when Rob Ford was having such difficulty as the mayor of Toronto, I wrote a column urging Rob Ford's staff to quit, not because he should quit from one day to the next all the time, but that sometimes what's going on in your workplace raises questions of what's your self-worth. Are you going to endorse what's happening by your presence?
Yeah.
And I think that's a question that's starting to raise itself in Trudeau's prime minister's office. That's a heavy statement.
It is a heavy statement.
It's not something I would have said a year ago.
Yeah. So this, just as we say goodbye, but back to the very title here, Justin Trudeau on the ropes. And I know you're the first one to say, I know the whole boxing match with Patrick Brazeau is overused and blah, 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 but you do see him that way. I mean, it seems to be where he thrives. If he feels like he's under attack, he's responding. And I think to your earlier point, he's just waiting for the other guy to tire out so that that left hook he's been practicing will actually work. Do you think there's any scenario in which he stays?
I mean, I think there is, but I think that I think there's a good chance that Justin Trudeau leads the Liberal Party into the next election. But I now think that between here and there, an effect of that decision will be that many people in his caucus and his cabinet announce they're not going to run again. Some people in his entourage suddenly discover opportunities in the private sector. Like, I think if it's Trudeau himself insists that he's got to run again, I think he's going to do it as more and more of a lone wolf over the next several months, because I know so many people who have worked closely with Justin Trudeau who are just throwing their hands up now that they're free to have an opinion. That I think there's got to be some people thinking like that inside his entourage, and that they won't stay for long.
Well, and his father did it before him. His father took a walk and then walked back. You know what I mean?
Pierre Trudeau's last election as leader of the Liberal Party, the 1980 election.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a very strange thing. It was after the 9 months of Joe Clark. It was a very, that was one of his most successful meetings with the Canadian electorate.
Yeah.
And so maybe Justin Trudeau's best election is still ahead, but I would be surprised if that's the case.
You would be, many people would be surprised. Okay, another day I want to talk to you then about journalism, but maybe I'll ask you just one final comment on this, because you and I share some views and concerns about, as you have started in your new world with your Substack and your podcasts and all of that, that journalism today, unfortunately, has become, they are a group, your phrase again, of grant farmers looking for that government money to keep them afloat because of bad management decisions and technological change and the whole thing. But journalists that are on the public payroll don't tend to bite the hand that feeds. Do you think it's going to be a significant factor in the election?
I wish it weren't the case. So take away how individual journalists think, and because I still think that journalism is a bunch of very different people who think in very different ways. But look at their interests. You've got a party that wants to spend more on the production of journalism in this country, and you've got a party that in government would propose to spend less on the production of journalism. And so there is a big objective conflict of interest for any journalist who covers the campaign. If the Liberals win, news organizations have more money, and if they don't win, then they don't. And it's entirely possible to imagine a reporter who says, "By God, I'm not going to let that affect me. I'm going to be equally tough. I'm going to be equally, But Canadians still have a right to wonder whether that affects journalistic behavior. And just the fact of permitting that wondering is something that I wish was not going on right now.
Yeah,
because
you and me both.
it's corrosive of public trust in the work that journalists do. I mean, and so I'm in this weird world now where I'm paid by my subscribers. I have to say that is very important to a lot of my subscribers. The fact that I'm not looking for the next government grant.
This
And
is how it worked in the old days. People had a subscription to their newspaper, and either people paid,
well, they sold a lot. I mean, and they sold a lot of advertising, which is the problem is that that's gone away.
Yeah.
But there's not a long history of the reporter who covers City Hall going to City Hall for a grant.
Yeah.
And it's not ideal that so many people think that's the only way we can make things work now.
Yeah. So. Well, you're leading by example and showing there's another way. Thanks, Paul, for your time.
Thanks so much for your time. I really had
great.
fun.
Here it is. Governing in troubled times, just a risk understatement. Justin Trudeau on the ropes, and Paul Wells is the author of that. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon. And that's it for this edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallin. We'll see you soon.